Yes, hello to you all once again, and another very warm welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, we were scheduled to show you racing footage from the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club's Round 5 event that was held at Whitekirk, but unfortunately now that won't be possible due to unforeseen circumstances, but nevertheless we still have some fantastic race bikes lined up for you to see here on my channel. Now again, thanks to all the recent subscribers who have just signed up to my YouTube channel, and I can see that our subscriber total is heading quite nicely towards that 12,500 mark. So thanks to each and every one of you for your continuing support of my YouTube channel. Now we're going to press on now with more classic racers, and this time round we're going to take a look at Graeme Farish's 1980 YZ250 Yamaha. Now Graeme's YZ250 here was just one of a few nice bikes that I captured at a Scottish Classic round at Lockerbie during 2021. Now, as far as I'm aware, Graeme's bike is a 1980 model, and I'm sure it's not an original bike from that year, so there's certainly no point in leaving comments to say that it's not got the correct parts in it for that year, because very few of these older YZs do have their original parts still fitted, which isn't surprising really when you consider that this bike is now clocking on to about 39 years old now. Now in 1980, that was the year that Yamaha launched a full lineup of these YZ motocross models, starting with of course the little tiny YZ250 right up to the superb YZ465, which is still regarded as one of Yamaha's best ever motocross machines. And also in 1980, this was around the time when, of course, motocross machines were changing from the twin rear shock suspension systems to these more modern single monoshock rear suspension configurations, which is why these kind of off-road racers were then titled Evolution bikes, because they were now evolving from that older twin shock suspension units to these ultra modern and more tunable single shock affairs. Now again, and as you're no doubt aware, these yellow liveried Yamahas were mainly sold to the American market, whereby the white and red liveried Yamahas were mainly targeted at European markets such as the UK. Now these 1980 bikes were powered by a 250 reed valve motor that had a 6-speed gearbox and a gear-driven clutch. Now, as I remember, these 250s had an alloy cylinder that had a cast steel liner inside and a 2-ring piston, but by all accounts these were pretty awesome little power plants for a 250, and although the motor never really had much in the way of bottom end grunt, once it did hit that sweet spot, which was in the mid-range, the bike took off like the proverbial rocket. But the motors in these YZ250s for 1980 were certainly among some of the best two-strokes that you could buy. Now, as I mentioned, the fuel into the motor was fed through a reed valve block, which was usually attached to one of these 38 millimeter Mikuni carburetors, which mixed the fuel air mixture before sending it into the combustion chamber to produce the power. Now, of course, this all worked in conjunction with Yamaha's YEIS system, or Yamaha Energy Induction System, to give it its full title, which was basically just a snazzy name for an empty plastic bottle. But basically this little black container was supposed to store a mixture of fuel and air, and when you cracked open the throttle it gave you that initial kick, but most riders just saw them as really a gimmick, and they never really actually helped in producing extra power, and often riders would just remove them with virtually no ill effects or reduction in power from the engine. Now, I'm not sure if these YZs ever suffered from a lack of air into the airbox, but you can see here that Graeme's drilled extra access holes in his airbox to obviously let in more air to the filter, but naturally, of course, the downside to that is it lets in more dirt and moisture as well. Now, the bike's top and bottom fork yokes, or triple clamps, are not the originals, of course, but a nice pair of billet alloy gold anodised parts, which will be, of course, every bit as good, if not better, than the Yamaha factory fittings. Now again, I'm sure that back in the day the front forks that were fitted to these YZ250s were 38mm stanchions that gave the rider, I think it was just over 11 inches of travel at the front, and as motocross suspension systems go for the 1980s, these were probably about the best that you could get in that particular year. And also for 1980 the travel was increased by an inch over the earlier 1979 bike, although surprisingly there was no means to adjust the rebound or damping on these forks, but you could help matters by adding or removing air through the Schrader valves on the top of each fork leg. But again, drum brakes of course for 1980, but it wouldn't be too long before Yamaha were then switching to the more modern hydraulic disc braking systems on all of their future motocross machines. Now at the rear of the bike, these YZs had the single monoshock unit that ran down the top of the frame, where it then bolted straight onto the Yamaha monocross alloy box section swing arm, which again was quite a decent setup for their time, although quite soon these types of suspension systems would then give way to the more ultra modern rising rate linkage systems, which were another huge step in motocross motorcycle upgrades. Although it has to be said, for its time, the back end of these YZ250s was quite radical and innovative, and it certainly suited this quite light motorcycle perfectly, and it did quite a decent job of soaking up the bumps and jumps on even the roughest of racetracks. Now, one of the other innovative ideas by Yamaha was to mount the rear shock reservoir to the outside of the frame down tube, which they say was done just to increase the volume of oil that they could fit inside it, and of course to place the canister into the flow of oncoming air, just to try and help cool the shock when it was being worked hard on the racetrack. Now, the exhaust again on Graeme's Yamaha isn't the bike's original, but another very high quality replacement by D&G Performance, who of course make all manner of race pipes for off-road and even road going motorcycles, and as you'd expect, this alloy rear tailpipe is again another quality D&G part, and these exhaust systems are a straightforward bolt-on replacement for the Yamaha factory originals. Now, the bike's fuel tank again is naturally made of plastic, as this was the 1980s, and plastic was fast becoming the material of choice for all motocross race bikes of that period. And as I mentioned, this yellow and black livery was normally aimed mainly at the international and US markets, while of course white plastics and red graphics were for Central Europe. Now, once again, these Yamaha YZ250s did have some of the most comfortable seats in their class, and these nice deep foam filled cushions certainly helped towards giving the rider somewhere soft to rest his weary backside down on when the going got rough, or when he wanted to shift his weight around the bike to make a tight turn out of a corner. And as you can see, these 250s did have quite a narrow profile and quite a slim and sleek looking back end. And if you were a rider back in 1980 and came up behind one of these bikes, you certainly knew immediately that you were following a YZ monoshock race bike. Now, once again, all of the bike's controls on Graeme's bike are not the 1980 original fixtures, and although it looks like he's still fitted a decent quality gasser throttle and a set of new grips and control cables, and also a good set of Renthal handlebars have been fitted, which have been bolted onto the top fork yoke using a pair of bar risers. Although overall these YZ250s were pretty awesome motorcycles for their time, and they weren't perfect by a long shot, but they did have a good chassis, good suspension on the front and rear, and of course that stonking 250 reed valve motor. And if you were a top rider in 1980 and you were serious about your racing and getting good results, then the chances are that you would be riding one of these YZ250s, or maybe even its bigger brother, the mighty YZ465. But either way, if you did wanted to be quick and stand on the winner's podium at the end of the day, a YZ had to be your weapon of choice, because these were one of the best bikes for that year. Now, you will be able to take a look at Graeme in action on this bike, and I'll leave a link below in the video description so that you can take a look at Graeme kicking ass and beating some of the bigger engine bikes on his YZ250 when he was racing at a recent Scottish Classic event at Lockerbie, when Graeme was racing this bike in the pre-1984 class. Although these YZ250s are yet another very popular choice of bike for riders who want to get into the twin shock or pre-1984-85 vintage racing scene, and these monoshocked race bikes are of course eligible to race at twin shock race events in the UK due to their rear suspension systems not having any form of linkage to the swing arm. They still of course have drum brakes, which is another basic requirement, but more importantly it has that air-cooled motor, which are all basic requirements to qualify. Well, I do hope you enjoyed taking that quite brief look at Graeme Farish's quite nice looking Yamaha YZ250, a very popular race bike for riders in the pre-1984 racing class. Now, of course, throughout the winter we will have plenty classic dirt bikes for you to take a look at here on my channel, so if you've not already done it, I do hope you will consider subscribing, because we have some fantastic machines to come in the coming weeks and months. So please sign up in order that you don't miss out on any of the fantastic bikes that I will be posting in the coming weeks. Okay, next up we're going to take a look at this very nice Honda CR250 Elsinore. Now, this bike belongs to Andy Farr, and we're going to take a look at Andy's lovely wee Elsie in my next video posting here on my channel. So until the next time, everybody, continue to be safe and well when you're out there riding those old vintage dirt bikes, and till we get back together again and talk about more racing machines right here on your #1 Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.